Hey guys, it's Thomas here with Technovision, and welcome back to some more modding for 1.16. In this episode, we're going to be covering entities, which are also known as mobs in the game. And in this specific episode, we'll only be covering passive mobs, which are like animals, essentially. But in the future, we will be covering more advanced mobs, specifically like hostile mobs with their like attack patterns and stuff. But for now, just a passive, simple entity so you can get a hang of it. And to get started, what you want to do, come over to your main package here, tutorial in my case, or whatever the name of your mod is. You want to right click, create a new package, and we're going to name this entities. And we want this to hold, just like blocks and items here, all of our entity classes. So we can make our first one right now, right click, new Java class, and you want to name this pretty much the name of your entity, followed by the word entity. So I'm going to be making a hog, which is like sort of a denomination of a pig with like little tusks on the end. So I'm going to name this hog entity. And that is the standard naming convention. Add to repository. Now, there's a few things you can extend this as depending on what you're making. I'm going to be extending this extends as animal entity because I want this entity rather to be an animal that can breed later on. I want it to be able to I think that's pretty much the only extra functionality animal entity brings is breeding. But if you didn't want to add breeding, I guess you could always just put creature entity instead, if that's something you wanted to do. But I would recommend animal entity because if you're making a passive mob, it most likely is going to be able to breed, I think. Otherwise, just use creature entity. Either will work fine. But I'm going to do animal entity. And what you want to do is hover over here and make sure you implement methods. And you want to implement this create child method. So there we go. We have our create child. And we want to also hover over here and create constructor matching super. And this will get the inherited constructor. Now you want to change protected to public because we will be using this later on in a different class when we register our entity. But the constructor is all good. It's all set for you. So that's great. We will be using this later. We haven't actually set the item in our init package yet. So we'll do this in a second. So you can ignore this for now. But what we want to do first is actually set the health and the movement speed of our entity. So we can do that by making a method here called public static attribute, or I believe it's called mutable attribute, actually. Mutable attribute. There we go. And we want to call this just like set custom attributes. And inside of here, we're going to be setting basically whatever attributes you want, any mutable attributes. That's how you say it. So we want to return mob entity dot, and this is actually going to be a an unmapped method here. So you're going to want to use func underscore 233.666 underscore p underscore. But what this is actually going to be mapped to in the future, if you have the updated mappings and are watching this from the future, just know that this function here is going to be mapped to register attributes, I believe. And you can find that on the Excel spreadsheet that Forge has. But yeah, mine is unmapped, so that's why I'm using this one. And then we're going to dot create a mutable attribute. And you want to pass into here an attribute. So attributes dot, and we can do max underscore health. And we can set it to whatever we want the maximum health of the entity to be. So for reference, a pig is 10.0D. So that's what I'm going to set this to because it is a hog. I guess we could set it a little bit higher maybe because it's supposed to be like a more like a tough pig, I guess is what you would think of like a hog. So we could set this to maybe 12, which is a little bit higher than a pig. But you can play around with this however you want. This is the maximum health. And then I'm also going to do create mutable attribute again. And this time we're going to do attributes dot movement speed. And we can set this to whatever you want. For reference, again, a pig is 0.25 D. So that is a pig's movement speed. But again, you can set this to whatever you'd like. The higher the number, the faster it'll be, I assume. And again, I'm not going to cover these, but you can also do other attributes as well. You can see there are a bunch here, attributes. You can see there's like attack, knockback, attack damage, flying speed, all this stuff. But those are all mainly for hostile mobs as well as for like flying mobs, which we'll be covering much later. So don't worry about that. But just know that you can play around with these and I encourage you to. All right, so we've got our attributes set. They're not actually registered yet because we have to use a deferred work queue, but we'll be doing that much later, so don't worry about that. Next thing we need to cover is goals. So in 1.16 and 1.15, and I think 1.14 as well, Minecraft changed the way mob AI works essentially by switching to a new system called goals. And you can think of goals exactly how it sounds. Just like humans have different goals in life, mobs also have goals in life essentially. Just simple goals like breeding, swimming when they get in water, looking at a player when they walk by, eating grass, stuff like that. They're all called goals. So to set some goals to really give your entity some custom AI, what you can do is you can @override. I guess I should do this. Yeah, we can do it right here. @override, and this is going to be called register goals. And you want to hit OK. All right, so make sure that it does call the super method because there might be some other stuff that animal entity does for us that we want to keep here. But after here, you can set as many goals as you'd like. So for example, I could do this dot goal selector dot add goal, and I could add the priority. So the priorities will be ranked from 0 onwards. And I believe the lower the priority, the more likely the mob is to do the task. So I think 0 would cause it to be the most likely task to be done. I believe that I could be wrong. It might be the other way around, but I'm pretty sure that's how it is. And then we can pass in a new goal. So new, and the first one I'm going to put in is a swim goal. And I'm just going to set this to this for the argument, the entity in. Okay, so let's cover this for a second. So a swim goal here, if we actually look at the code here, you can hold Control on your keyboard and click to open up the class. And you can see this is like pretty simple code. It's just setting what should happen on a tick. It's just telling the entity, oh, you should float if you're in water, so you don't sink to the bottom of the ocean if the entity does jump in water. Now, there's a bunch of different goals that you can use, that you can pick from. I will be covering how to make your own custom goals in the future, so definitely watch out for that. But for now, you're limited to the vanilla ones, and you can check out all of them by going to the goal class here. Again, hold Control on your keyboard to open it up, and if you hold and you press Control H, it'll open up the hierarchy chart here, and you can see all of the goals that extend goal here. So these are pretty much all of the vanilla goals. There's a ton of them, so you have access to all of them. Use them as you'd like, and you can mess around with those. But I already have some ones in mind that I want to use, but just keep in mind that's how you find them. So the next one I want to set, we can do again this .goal selector .add goal. This will be priority 1 because it's the next one. It's less likely to occur. Is a panic goal. So new panic goal, and we want to pass in our entity, so this, and then a speed value. So my speed value will be 1.25D. So the panic goal is essentially, to my knowledge, when you hit an entity, this, if it has a panic goal, it will like run around. So, you know, like if you hit a cow in Minecraft, it like runs around all panicked. That's what this is. And this is the speed, because it will give the entity a speed boost here whenever it gets panicked. And then we can add some more. So hopefully you can see this sort of like adding AI to like a entity brain kind of. So this .goal selector .add goal, priority 2 now, a little bit less likely than before. This is going to be a new breed goal. I'm just going to add this. Again, this is all theoretical. You can change this as you'd like. We're going to pass in our entity, and then I want 0.D for the speed. This is just them breeding, essentially being able to breed. But this isn't going to allow us to breed just yet. We will have to add some more stuff in another video, but we do need this goal in order for breeding to work. And then we can add another. I'm just going to copy all this so that I can just keep blazing through this really fast. Add goal. This one will be 3. And I'm going to make this new tempt goal. And this will pass in a this for our entity, a speed value of 1.1D, and then we need some temptations. So a tempt goal is very important, especially if you're making a passive, like, breedable entity. If you've ever wondered how, like, pigs follow you when you're holding carrots, or, like, I believe, like, chickens follow you if you're holding wheat seeds, that is essentially a temptation item. So we can set our own temptation items so that our mob will follow us if we're holding it. And you can do that by coming up here to the top and making a new ingredient by doing public static final ingredient. And we're gonna name this temptation underscore items. And we want this to be equal to ingredient dot from items, and you can pass in as many items as you'd like to be temptation items. So for the vanilla pig, I believe they have carrots set as a temptation item. There's also items dot potato that they use, and then they also use items dot beetroot. There we go. So this will set carrot, potato, and beetroot all as temptation items. So my hog will follow you if you're holding these, just like a pig does. But if you want to set these to like a custom item that you just made for your mod, you could do mod items dot, you could get like your custom item like ruby and then dot get. And that would work just as fine as well. I don't want really a ruby to be the temptation item, but you can do that if you'd like. And again, vanilla items is just items dot. Okay, so we have our list here, temptation items. We can copy this and throw it into tempt goal here. So that's gonna set those as the tempt goal. And then we need to set this last value as false. This determines whether the animal is scared by player movement. So like if you come up to it, like an ocelot, for example, is scared by player movement, even if you're holding like items that it likes. So if you set this to true, it'll have very similar functionality to like an ocelot. Okay, so now we can add another goal here. Another goal, this one's gonna be priority 4. Bear with me here. I want to add a few. I want to add like 8 to this entity. This one's going to be a new follow parent goal. And this is going to allow when we add breeding later on, the entity to like follow its parent. So I'm going to pass in this and then just like 1.1D. There we go. I'm going to add another goal again. Priority 5. Again, 0 is the highest priority, 5 is the lowest priority. So if it's swimming, it's more likely to make sure it's floating than it is to panic, if that makes sense. All right, so the next one I want to add is new avoiding random walking goal. There we go. And we're going to pass in this and then 1.0D for the speed. I'm not too sure what this does, to be honest with you. I just found it in the vanilla code for pigs, but I'm pretty sure it prevents walking while it's in water, just so it doesn't like look kind of weird. And then we can add another goal here again, this time priority 6, and this is going to be new look at goal. And I am adding this so that our hog will actually look at the player when you walk by, which is what most animals do, I believe. And we're going to pass in this for the entity, of course. Then the thing I wanted to look at, you can set this to be whatever you want your mob to look at. If you set this to like a creeper, you could have it look at creepers when they walk by, like that. I want this to be the player, so player entity dot class to get the whole class there. And then 6.0F for the max distance. So that's how far away you have to be for them to look at you. So yeah, again, you can set this to a custom mob if you wanted, or a vanilla mob as well, for them to look at, I believe. And then the last one I'm going to add, the last goal I'm going to add is going to be priority 7. And this is going to be a new look randomly goal. And this is going to give the entity some AI to just look around randomly, because in vanilla Minecraft, most mobs just sort of look around and move their head every once in a while, so that they look a little bit more alive. And this is going to pass in just the entity. There we go. All right, so now we're pretty much done with our AI for this mob here. Again, think of this method like the brain of the entity, and each goal you add is a new piece of the AI that you're adding to the brain. Okay, that's all done. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is experience points. So, by extending animal entity, it's already going to make your entity here drop XP. I believe it drops between 1 to 3 in XP values by default. But if you don't want that, or you want to change it for whatever reason, then what you can do, and again, this is totally optional, you can override get experience points. And you can set how much XP your entity will drop when the entity dies. And you can set it here by just returning a number. So if I returned like 1, this would always drop 1 XP point whenever it dies. What you want to do most likely is have like a random amount. So I'm going to have 1 plus this dot world dot random dot next int, and then like I'm gonna set this to 4. So what this will do is generate a random amount of XP between 1 and I believe like 3, or I guess it'd be between 1 and 4, and it'll return that. So this entity will drop a random XP between 1 and 4. All right, next I want to set the sounds, and this is the noise obviously that the entity makes when it's in the world. So first one I want to override is the get ambient sound, and this is just the like sound it makes whenever it's roaming around, just like the general animal noise. Now I will be talking about custom sounds in another video, so we won't be doing that here. I will be using vanilla sounds, but just know that in the future you can use custom sounds for this. So I'm going to return a sound event, so sound events dot, and you can choose any sound you want for the ambient sound. I'm gonna put just entity underscore pig underscore ambient because I just want this to sound exactly like the pig because it is a hog, but again you can set this to whatever you'd like. Next we want to override the get death sound, and just like it sounds, this is going to be the death sound, and we can do again sound events dot, and I'm just going to do entity underscore pig death, but you can do whatever you'd like for your mob. And again, you can use custom sounds if you'd like. And then the last one is going to be the override get hurt sound, and this is going to be the noise it makes when you hit it with a sword or like your hand or something. And this is going to return for me sound events dot, and you can choose whatever you'd like here. Mine is going to be entity underscore pig underscore hurt, as you would expect. And we can just make these inline because they are pretty small, these methods here. And yeah, there we go. All right. And I'm going to get rid of this nullable here because it's not really necessary. All right. So our sound is done. Oh, I did miss one more sound actually. We should add that really quickly. We want to override the on, or I guess it's just called play step sound. This is going to play a sound when the mob walks, like you would expect with most mobs. And you can mess around with this a little bit if you want, and play different sounds depending on like the block position or the block state. But I am just going to this dot play sound, and then you can pass in a sound event. So sound events dot, and then I'm going to play just the regular entity underscore pig underscore step. But you can pass in whatever you like, of course, for your sound. For the volume, if you want it to be like vanilla Minecraft walking noises, just set it to 0.15 F. And then for the pitch, again, for vanilla Minecraft, just set it to 1.0 F. Those will be like default values for the most part. All right, all good. So if we file save all, file save all, there we go. Okay, so our entity class is pretty much done. Now I want to show you one extra thing before we move on, because I do think that this is something that some of you might want to add, and it's a little bit more advanced. So I want to talk about how to make your mob eat grass. So if your mob is gonna like eat grass like sheep, and it might not do anything for our hog, but if we want to just do it anyway, I'm just going to show you right now. What you want to do is come up here right above your constructor, and you want to make a private eat grass goal, and you want to name it again just like eat grass goal. And you also want to make a private int called the name of your mob, so like hog and then timer. We're going to use these two variables because we don't want it to just eat grass at all times, so we need to set some like custom timing for this so that your mob is like randomly eating grass, or eating grass like as necessary. So to do that, what we can do is come all the way down here, and I guess we should do this, right below create child, and we want to override. The first one we should do is update AI tasks, and this will, as it sounds, update the AI tasks. And we can do that by first setting the hog timer here, our custom timer, equal to this dot eat grass goal dot get eating grass timer. That will get the timer and set our custom timer to it, as you would expect. And then we want to call super.update AI tasks, so that I can run the rest of the code that is set in animal entity here. All right. Now we also need to add override living tick. And inside of here, again, keep the super method, or the super line here, of course. But we want to check if this.world.isRemote. And if it is remote, then we want to set our hog timer here equal to a math.max between 0 and then our current hog timer -1. And this is just going to perform some important resetting on for living tick whenever like the living tick is called for the entity. And then finally, we want to create our own method here called public void handle status update. And this is just going to pass in like a byte called ID. And we can add only in here. So we want to make sure that this only runs client side. So we want to do dist.client, oh, I got to import dists. It seems like dist is not letting me import it for some reason. That is very weird. Dist.client. There we go. Import dist. So this tag here is going to make sure this only runs client side, which is very important. And if the ID is equal to 10, then we want to set the hog timer equal to 40. Otherwise, we just want to run the super handle status update and pass in the ID. Okay, there we go. So these three methods here are going to essentially make your entity eat grass at like intervals that make sense. It won't just be like random. It'll be based on like like you could say it's when the entity is hungry essentially. It's adding a little bit of AI basically. But we do need to add the goal here in our register goals. So to do that, we should I think this should be like priority 5. So we can come down here, this.goalSelector.add goal, priority 5, and then we just want to pass in this.eatGrass goal because we've already set it up here. And because we set this to 5, we need to shift all of our priorities up 1. And there we go. So we can file, save all, and we are now, for the most part, done with our entity class. So now we want to register our entity in the game. So to do that, we need to make a new class in our init package here. And we want to right click, create a new Java class, and you want to just name this like mod entity types and add to repository. And just like our mod blocks and our mod items, this is going to hold our deferred register for our entity types and then our registry objects, of course. So we want to make a new public static deferred register, and this is going to take in entity type, which has its own parameterization, which is a question mark because we'll be setting that later. Import class, and we want to name this entity underscore types. Is going to equal deferred register dot creates, and we're going to pass in forge registries dot entities because these are entities, and our main class dot mod ID. So we get our mod ID. There we go. And now we need to actually make the object for our custom hog entity. So I'm going to make a little note here, entity types. So we want to make a public static final registry object, and you want this to be parameterized around entity type, which has its own parameterization for your class you just made, which in our case is hog entity. So hog entity, and this is going to be named whatever the name of your mob is. So in my case, a hog, and this is going to equal, of course, our entity items deferred register dot register. And this is going to be really long, so bear with me. We need to first pass in the name, so just hog. And then we need a supplier, which points to entity type dot builder dot create. And let's move this down real quick. If you can't find this dot create method when you type a period on builder, if it doesn't pop up, because I have had issues with that in the past, feel free to check out the GitHub in the description, and you can just copy and paste from there because for some reason this method sometimes has problems showing up. But do dot create, and then you want to pass in your class you just made. So hog entity : new to make a new instance, and we want to pass in the entity classification, which can be whatever you want. It could be monster, it could be ambient, water creature, but in our case, it's just a creature because it's just a regular passive animal. And then we want to also set the size, so dot size here. And you want to pass in two things for the size. First is going to be like the width, and then the second one is going to be the height. Now, what you pass in here can be whatever you'd like. It's going to be the hitbox, essentially, the area in the game that you can hit your mob. So passing this in as 1.0f and 1.0f will actually make the hitbox 1 block big. It'll be 1 block wide and 1 block high. If you set this to like 3 here, for example, it would be 3 blocks high but 1 block wide. So hopefully that makes sense. You can mess around with this however you'd like, and I would recommend setting this pretty similar to whatever the size of your entity is in Blockbench, which we'll be making in a second. But yeah, so that's the size of the hitbox. And then we also want dot build, so we can actually build this entity. And we're going to pass into here a new resource location. And this is going to pass in our mod ID from our main class. The name again of the entity, so in our case hog. And again, use underscores for spaces if you have to. And then we're just going to set this to toString. There we go. Okay, so now we have our actual entity registered as a registry object. So there's one more thing we have to do. Well, I guess 2 more things among the many other things we have left in this tutorial. But to finish our hog entity class, you want to come back over here. And now that we have our actual item here in our mod entity types class, we can go to create child here, and we want to set this child to be the actual the entity itself. So what we can do is set this to mod entity types dot get the name of your custom entity you just made, dot get, and then dot create, and just pass in this dot world. And this will make sure that when your animal item breeds, when we set up breeding in another episode, it'll create a brand new hog creature in this world. And if you scroll up a little bit, remember that we made this set custom attributes method. Now we've set the attributes, but we need to actually add them to the global entity type attributes list. So to do that, we want to go to our main class, and this is very important. Your entity will not load if you do not do this. We want to make a new deferred work queue, and we want to run later. Want to add an extra parenthesis there because we are going to open this up with some curly braces. And inside of this deferred work queue, you need to add a new line every single time you make a new entity, otherwise it will not load. So what we need to do is get the global entity type attributes, and we want to put our brand new attributes. So what you want to pass in here first is the entity, so mod entity types, and get your entity that you just made, in my case hog. And then you want to get the attributes. So we can do that by getting our custom class we just made, so hog entity, getting that new method we just set, like I was mentioning earlier, set custom attributes, and then dot create. And this is going to make sure, also you want to make sure that when you get your entity here, you do dot get, because otherwise you're just getting the registry object, not the actual entity. Okay, so yeah, so this is making sure that we're setting the attributes of hog into the global entity type attributes. And again, you have to copy and paste this line and throw a new one down into the deferred work queue every single time you add a new entity, and change the entity here and the custom class every single time, otherwise your entity will not work. So very important. But yeah, so now our entity is actually inside of the game. Now what we need to do is make sure that it's actually modeled, that it is rendered into the game, and we need to add a little bit of animation. So to do that, what we need to do, make sure you save all, go to your desktop here, and if you haven't installed Blockbench, I talked about it in an earlier tutorial. I think it was the advanced blocks tutorial, but download Blockbench, the link will be in the description. And once you open it up, this is a modeling software to allow you to create custom entities. You want to choose modded entity, and you can just name this whatever you want. Mine is going to be hog. Make sure that your export version is set to 1.15, very important, and you can hit confirm. Now, I am not actually going to go over the process of making a entity because there are great other tutorials out there on YouTube, and that's not really the point of this tutorial. So I will leave one in the description, a tutorial on how to create an entity and animate it all yourself in Blockbench. It's an amazing tutorial, so I definitely recommend you watch that. But one thing I do want to mention before you go off and do that is because of the way animations work in Forge, for whatever reason, every single individual like section of your mob that you want to be used within animations, you have to have it in its own group. So what I would recommend is right away, I don't know how to delete this cube. There we go. What I would recommend right away is creating a few folders. You want to make one called like head. Sorry, make it lowercase for sure. So I would make one for the head. I would make one for the body. I would make one for the leg front right, so the front leg. I would make one, I would make one for the leg front left. I would make one for, I keep going into the subgroup here. I would make one for the leg back right. And then I would finally make one, gosh, I keep doing that. I would make one for the leg back left. So yeah, I would definitely throw all of your head cubes into this one, all of your body cubes here, and then your corresponding legs into here. And you'll see why in a second, but once you're done, come back and I will have my entity ready. All right, so now that your entity is all modeled and textured, what you wanna do is first make sure that all of your cubes are in their own package. Very important that each cube has its own package, or at least each general section of your mob. If a cube does not have its own package, it will not be counted in the next steps that we do. So very important. You can see that our head here has like a snout and a head. They're combined into one because the whole head will be animated later. So that's why I'm doing that. But generally keep each section of the body, like I said earlier, like the center, the head, the legs, each to their own package. Very important. And another thing that's also very important is you'll notice with each section of the body, if you click on the package, not the block, the package, you'll notice that there's a pivot point. And if we actually move this out here from the leg, you can see it poking out here. What this is it's the point at which your limb will actually be bent to generate like the, or create the animation effect. So for example, we want our legs to move when the entity is walking. So you want this pivot point to be right where the two parts of the body combine. So you can see our leg here, right where it touches the center of the body. You can see our pivot point is literally right between there. You want the center to be right between there. And you can kind of see it poking out. And you want to do that for all of your limbs. So all of your legs, the pivot point should be, again, you can poke it out just to make sure, it should be right where the leg will be bent, right in the center. And you also want to make sure the same for the head. You want to make sure that the pivot point, in our case, the pivot point is, it's right there. You want the pivot point, you can see it's like right where the head meets the body. That is going to be the point at which the head rotates, so that the head can do something like this. It can rotate like this when it's in the game. So very important, make sure that you set that pivot point. Again, it's where one piece of the body meets the other. That's where you want it to like bend on, the axis you want it to bend on. So very important, once you've set that, what you want to do is come up to File, Export, Export Java Entity, hit Desktop, name it the name of your mob or whatever you want to name it, and you want to make sure you save it as a Java class. Hit Save, and if you go to your desktop here, you'll have this class here, and you'll notice that it actually is generating a full Java class for us with the model. So it's all done pretty much, and we can add this to the game in a second here. But again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but make sure you save this image as well. Right click and save as to your desktop, the PNG image. Very important. Okay, so now that we have this class and our image and our model, essentially, we want to go back to IntelliJ, go to your main package here. You want to create a new package named client. And we're going to throw everything in here that has to do with like client-side rendering and models. So you want to make two packages, one called model and another called, that's definitely not how you spell model, And we want to make another one called render. And inside of model, I'm going to create a new class. And we're going to name this the name of our mob. So hog and then model. And add a repository. Now this is going to extend. Well, first it's going to be parameterized, very important. That is parameterized with T, and that extends hog entity, which is that class we made for our custom entity here, that custom hog entity class we made. And then we want to make sure that this extends entity model, because it is an entity model, which is parameterized just around T. And yeah, so make sure you import entity model as well. There we go. Now, don't implement any methods. What we're going to do, oh gosh, I don't know why it teleported me to the main class. What we want to do is go to our desktop and get this class here. You want to open it up with like Notepad or anything like that, and just copy everything inside of the class declaration. Copy, right click copy, and you want to paste it in. All right, and we want to change the constructor name to our class name, so just paste that in real quick. And yeah, so now what we need to do is just make sure that we import all of this stuff here. So import, oh, it looks like it imported most of it for us. Import entity, we want to import matrix stack, we want to import iVertex builder, and delete this method here, this set rotation angles. This is going to give you an error, so definitely delete this. And you want to hover over here, implement methods, and implement set rotation angles. This will implement the right one. Hit OK, and there we go. So we've got the new set rotation angles method, and we've got our model. So you'll notice here, let me get rid of this import. You'll notice here that each of these model renders is associated with each of the packages that we made in Blockbench. And that's just like I said, that's why you have to make them that way. It's very important. So what it's doing is it's setting like the texture offset, that pivot point that I mentioned. It's setting like the children, all of that stuff. So what we want to do, this is all set for us. We want to actually set the rotation angles. This is going to be the angle at which like the head and the feet move. Now, I'm not going to cover like custom animations right now because I think that's a little bit too advanced. But what you can do is I will have it in a pastebin in the description, but you can always just go to animal, or what is it called? Sorry, not animal, entity model, or quadruped model. And you can hold Control to open this up and just copy everything in the set rotation angles here. Again, I'll have this as a pastebin in the description in case you want to copy it there. And this is actually like just the default movement rotation angles for like passive mobs, I believe, or for most mobs. So, and make sure you just change head model to head. And if you have errors here, it's because these names are not lining up with your packages you made. So I recommend making your packages exactly like these. But if you don't want to do that, then just change head to whatever package you have set here for your head. Change body to whatever holds your body component. Left, back, right, leg rather, back, right to whatever you have set for that, and so on and so forth, so that you can set the different angles for each body part. So yeah, so that's all done now. Now our entity will actually have an animation in the game. And again, I'll be covering custom animations ourselves in a later video. Now what we need to do is actually go and create the render. So to do that, we need to go into client again, and we have our model here, but we want to make a new class in render. And we want to name this the name of your mob, so hog, and then renderer. Renderer. There we go. Hard to say. And we want this to extend. So extends mob render, parameterized around hog entity, which is our custom entity class we just made, as well as a comma and our hog model that we just made. So that hog model class we just made. And again, another parameterization, but this is going to be parameterized around, again, hog entity. So that custom entity class we just made. All right, so I know that this is like really a lot of parameterization, but just bear with me. This is how you're supposed to do it. And what we want to do is make sure we implement methods, and you want to implement get entity texture. And you also want to implement or create constructor matching super rather. All right, and what we can do in here is just remove everything except for the first entity render manager. And what you want to do with this is just keep it how it is, throw it into super, and then just delete these this errors here. And after render manager in, what you want to throw in is a new hog model, so that model class we just made, and then you want to throw in the shadow. So this is going to be like the shadow that shows up below your entity. So I'm going to set this to 0.7f because that's the default for like a pig, since this is going to be very similar. You can mess with this however you want, but the bigger this is, I believe, the larger the circle shadow will be on your entity. And yeah, so all this is doing is creating a render for our custom entity, and it's setting the model to the class we just made, that model, and it's setting the shadow size here. And then we need to get the entity texture, which is that texture that we have on our desktop here that we used in Blockbench. So what you want to do is create a protected static final resource location called texture. And you want this to equal a new resource location, and this is going to pass in your mod ID from your main class, as well as a string, and this is going to be the pathway to your custom texture. So in our case, if we open up resources here, we need to open up resources, go to assets, tutorial, textures, and we want to make actually a brand new package in here called entities. And just like you would expect, this is going to hold textures for entities. And oh, sorry, do not name it entities. I definitely messed that up. You want to name it just entity, singular. So just entity. And this is going to have our PNG file for our entity. So we can actually drag that in right now. Make sure again that the name of your PNG here is the exact name that you set in your, where is it? In your init, right here, that you set for your name. So mine is just hog.png, and you want to throw it into that entity folder here and refactor. There we go. So again, we've got resources, assets, your mod ID, textures, a new package named entity, and you want to throw it in there. And then we're just going to add that pathway to our texture here, our resource location. So that would be textures / entity / and then the name of your PNG file. So mine is hog.png, and that'll be whatever you put right here. All right, and now we can actually make sure that our getEntityTexture method returns our texture. Very important. So now our render is all done pretty much. It's going to render the model. What we do need to do though is make sure that it's actually working client side by registering the entity rendering handler. So to do that, I know again, another step, it's a ton of work, but what you want to do is come to util and create a new class in util. And we're going to name this, let's name it client event bus subscriber, and add a repository. Now we're going to use this in future tutorials a lot for a lot of like client-based entity rendering and stuff like that. But what you want to do is make sure that you add the @mod tag above .event bus subscriber. Well, let's make sure we import mod first. .event bus subscriber. And this is going to pass in your mod ID is equal to main class.mod ID. And then our bus again has to be equal to mod.event bus subscriber dot, and make sure or dot bus rather, and make sure this is set to mod. Very important. If it's set to anything else, it will not work. So set to mod, and then our value is just going to be equal to dist.client, and import dist here. Dist.client. There we go. Import class. And that's just making sure that this is only rendered, or this is only called client side. And what we're going to do, just like we talked about in events, we're going to create a new subscribe event. And this is going to be a public static void on client setup. And you're going to pass in a Forge mod loader client setup event named events. Now for this event, this is going to run every time Forge mod loader sets up its clients. Oh, I keep messing up here. Okay, there we go. And inside of here, what we want to do is add our mod entity renderer. So rendering registry dot register entity rendering handler, very long name. And you want to pass in your entity. So mod entity types dot get your entity, which mine is hog dot get. And then you want to pass in that brand new renderer class that we just made for our entity. So hog renderer new, colon new. And you have to do this for every single new entity you make. So every time you make a new entity, just copy this line, paste it down below, change the entity here, and change the renderer class. So yeah, make sure you do that every time, and we can file, save all. And I believe we are almost done with our entity. There's a few more things we need to do. Just really quickly, we want to go into our lang folder here in assets and resources, en_us.json, and we definitely want to add a name to our entity. And we can do that with, we need to set entity.yourModID, so tutorial, and then dot, and then the name that you set in your init here, so hog. So again, that's entity.yourModID, the name of your entity, colon, and then we can just set a custom name for it. I'm just gonna put hog. Now the last thing we need to do is just come to our main class here, and you'll notice that we haven't actually registered that brand new init class that we made, our mod entity types, just like with our blocks and items, because it is a deferred register. So we need to do mod entity types dot entity types dot register, and then again, you can just copy everything up here. Forge mod loading context dot get mod event bus. And yeah, so again, you only have to do this one time because it's just making sure that we're registering all of the deferred registry objects inside of here. All right, so our mob is now done and is added into the game, and now we can run the game and go check it out. So I'm gonna run the game with this green little triangle up here, and I will see you in a second. All right, really quickly, it looks like I got a tiny little error here. It seems like in hog entity on line 51, I forgot to actually instantiate our eat grass goal object here, which was like just a stupid mistake on my part. So in your entity class, your custom entity class that you made, if you're using this eat grass goal, make sure that in register goals, right below your super call, make sure that you actually instantiate the variable, or the object rather, otherwise it will not work. So make sure you do this dot eat grass goal is equal to new eat grass goal, and then just pass in this. So stupid mistake on my part, I apologize, but now we should actually be able to run the game and check out our entity. All right, so now that we're in the game, the way that you spawn your custom entity is by typing /summon, the name of your mod ID, so tutorial, and then a colon, and then the name of your mob. And if we'd enter, there we go, it is now in the game, our custom mob. And let me add another because that one immediately ran away from me. But you can see that it is looking at us just like we set in the AI. The walking animation is all good. If the walking animation looks weird, or the limbs are like being dismembered, that means that you need to go back in Blockbench and set the pivot point because you didn't do that right, like I mentioned earlier. But you can see also, if we hit it, it does have the pig noises just like we set. And if we kill it, we'll also get some XP, just like we set as well. And last thing I want to check, well, I want to make sure that they're actually eating grass because we did set that. So I'm going to make a couple just because I really want to make sure they're eating grass. And let's just see if one of them eats any grass blocks. There we go. So they are eating grass, as you can see right there. We probably won't see them because there's so many, but they are definitely eating grass. There we go. We just saw one eat grass right there. So they're eating grass just like we set. And also let's try the temptation object. So I believe we set it as a carrot. And there we go. So just like with regular mobs in the game, or passive animals rather, they will follow you with a certain temptation object. So yeah, now what we're gonna do, if you notice here, they don't actually drop anything. So we're gonna go back into IntelliJ and I'm gonna show you how to add some custom drops to them. All right, so to add some custom drops, what you wanna do is go to your resources folder, go to data, go to your mod ID, loot tables, and just like we did with our blocks, we're gonna have to make a loot table for entities. So create a new directory called entities. And all of your entity drops are now gonna be in this folder here. And you wanna create a new file. And you wanna name this exactly what you named your entity. So again, that's in mod entity types here. We named ours hog. You wanna name it exactly what you named that. Rename file, name is hog.json. And add a repository. Now I have in the description a link to the JSON that you can copy and paste here. This is just a regular vanilla Minecraft pig JSON loot table, so you can modify it how you'd like. I'm gonna go through it in a second, but just to make it easier, I have it in the description, and you can paste it in. So to customize this how you want, essentially you can leave everything the same here except rolls is the amount of times that this whole loot table runs. If you set it to 1, it'll run 1 time, which is what I prefer you set it as, or I would recommend that you set it as. This right here is going to be the amount of the item that drops. If you want to set it to like a minimum of 1 to 3 here, just like we have here, you can set the max higher or lower, whatever you want. This will drop between 1 to 3 of the objects. This here is a little section that you can delete if you'd like. You can just literally cut it out entirely. But this is basically says if you have, like if the entity is on fire, it'll drop like a cooked version of the item. So that's definitely something you can add if you want. This is the looting enchant, which increases the amount that you get by 1, it seems. Again, you can totally remove this if you'd like by just cutting this piece out. And then right here finally is the object. So if you wanted to drop like a custom item, you could put tutorial and then like the name of your object. So like in our case, Ruby. But I want it to be a vanilla object, so Minecraft, and I just wanted to drop pork chops, just like a pig. And yeah, so if you don't know what's going on here, definitely watch my loot tables video. I think it was like episode 4, and it's very modular, so you can add different modules and multiple items if you'd like. So yeah, that's how you add some drops, and now let's go test it out in the game. All right, so now we can summon our entity again. So summon tutorial hog, and we can kill it. And there we go, it does drop pork chops now. So your custom entity now has its own loot table, and you can modify that however you'd like. So that's gonna do it for this video. Thanks guys so much for watching. I hope you learned a lot about entities and how to add them to the game and texture them and model them. And I will see you all in the next episode.